The East African Community Forces have begun withdrawing from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Two contingents of about 100 Kenyan soldiers flew out of Goma airport today. It's after Kinshasa deemed the peacekeeping mission ineffective and refused to renew its mandate despite the M23 rebel group continuing to create havoc. President Felix Tshisekedi hopes to replace the East African Community Forces with Sadc soldiers as he's accused the EAC of colluding with the rebel group. Let's talk more about this now. We're joined tonight by Professor Christopher Afoke, who's with the University of Pretoria's African Politics and International Relations Department. A very good evening to you, sir. Good to have your time on Newzroom Afrika. Will the DRC be any less safer, I wonder, in the East now that these troops from the region have been sent packing?
Good evening, Thembekile, and thank you for having me on your show. Yes, interesting question to ask, and it's a very difficult one to answer. It can be easy and difficult because it's easy if you look at the history of conflict in that region, which you can trace back to 1961 when they killed the first democratically elected president of the Congo DRC, Patrice Lumumba. And since then, that country has been embroiled in perennial conflict that has just refused to go away, especially in that eastern part of the country. About a year ago, there was optimism that there was going to be some kind of peace after President Tshisekedi accused the UN MONUSCO force for not being able to deliver on their peace mandates with over 16,000 troops there. And then there was hope, but 1 year after, it appears that this hope has dimmed, and it's difficult to say that, with the East African Community Regional Force departing now, that the Sadc peacekeeping force would do any better, but we'll just have to wait and see.
Why was the regional force unable, for example, to stop the M23 rebels in their tracks?
Well, look, the conflict is beyond, the region. The conflict is beyond, the continent, if you want to even put it at that. The DRC is the resource richest country in the world. Like I said, it's been embroiled in conflict since 1961. But in all that years, mining, extraction of the resources of the DRC has never stopped. So there are people who benefit from conflict in that region, and there's international and national collusion that has constantly enabled conflict to continue to go on. The political economy of war, as many political economists would say, but. You remember that in this force you had troops from Uganda, Kenya, I think from South Sudan, forming this EAC force. Uganda has been accused in the past of having links with Rwanda, and Rwanda is seen to be a supporter of the M23. These are accusations that have been treated back and forth. But the point is the collusion that is being accused, by President Tshisekedi now, is in saying that the EAC has been in cahoots with the M23 rebels rather than, making them to put down their weapons. They're in cahoot. And it's not surprising if you look at the amount of money that all sides that are invested interest stakeholders of this conflict get to benefit from the status quo. So I'm not sure why this is the case, but you also know that elections are coming up in December. President Tshisekedi is standing in for a second term of 5 years. So there are a lot of factors at play beyond just the ineffectiveness of the EAC regional force.
I'd like to talk to you about the elections later on in our conversation, but on the suggestion that perhaps Sadc boots on the ground militarily would be more effective than the EAC. What would the Sadc troops have to do differently in order to become effective? And when you consider the fact that the M23 rebels have in fact been able to make advances, and more people we're seeing are being displaced, many are being killed, and even the government troops are being accused of being complicit in the killing and suffering of civilians in the East.
Hmm. Well, look, it's supposed to be both an advantage. It's going to be an advantage and disadvantage in the sense that the one advantage that the EAC forces had was knowledge of the terrain, knowledge of the area, as well as even ethnic congruity with the people in the DRC. But it appears that did not become an advantage because maybe there was too much vested interest from all sides, and it's also beyond money, even though I said money was the main factor. In the case of the Sadc, the advantage is this scenario can replay itself. The advantage of people that are not vested ethnically in the region and may be able to do their job more professionally without any kind of encumbrance. That can be an advantage that, if well utilized, can be a difference maker in this instance.
So you mentioned the issue of the elections. 20th of December is when the people in the DRC are supposed to go to this general election. With fighting continuing, is the risk of Congolese people in the East in particular, is there a risk of them basically losing their right to participate in a free and fair electoral process that is also safe?
Well, I think they are going to have to be disenfranchised because we also hear that elections will not take place in some of those areas in the North Kivu province where the fighting is very intense and taking place. So they've been able to say that there will be no elections in two of the territories there. And effectively those people will be disenfranchised. But of course we have to think about security. Elections cannot take place in that kind of atmosphere. That is not just a political move. It is something that has to do with the safety of people. I would presume that there could be ways to try and get them to vote, but it will be really impossible given the short time between now and when the elections will hold in a few weeks from now.
But can one then take seriously an election outcome from polls where a section of the population was unable to vote due to active warfare, but also that section that would basically be excluded potentially from the process is one that is feeling and has experienced the effects of this fighting and would be able to then basically give the government of President Tshisekedi in particular, a scorecard on how they believe it's done in protecting them?
Well, the straightforward answer is no. There can be legitimacy questions around that. But if this is well intentioned, if it's done in good faith, then I'm sure that people would understand why elections did not happen, and that does not, however, mean that there will be no representation from the East DRC, especially the North Kivu province in government, if the incumbent wins the election. There are ways to ensure, for instance, a constitutional arrangement that ensures that everyone that is supposed to be represented is represented, but the will of the people could be subverted in many ways if they are prevented from participating. One low-hanging fruit perhaps would be to postpone the elections to a time where it would be conducive to conduct elections all over the country. But given the history of the country and the constitutional constraints around postponement, it can be an issue. Of course, there's also the political issue of wanting to accuse the president that he wants to stay beyond his term limit. That can also become a political issue that can be blown out of proportion. The DRC is a very volatile country, and anything can spark a conflict very quickly, including even denying people their right to vote. So it's a very complex situation that will require real leadership on the part of all stakeholders in the country to find a way out of.
Professor Christopher Afoke, good to speak to you, with the University of Pretoria's African Politics and International Relations Department.